Hello, my name is Bashaina Dimila, and today we're joined by Nicholas Benson, the author of our newest publication, I Commissioned Some Wooden Luggage. Welcome, Dr. Benson.
Thank you.
Can you briefly introduce yourself and describe what motivated you to write this book?
So I'm a translator, I'm a teacher, and I'm a poet. And this collection evolved over a long period of time, I would say. And what motivates me, I'd say it's everything that we can't say directly. In other words, what we can't even necessarily think coherently, I try to put those things, but those things actually emerge in the poems. I don't know if I try to, they just do. So the poem, for me, is like a space for more difficult realizations and feelings to emerge and to evolve, um, and be expressed. It's for indirect associative thinking. Maybe something like the way an artist approaches a canvas, if they're not just painting realistic pictures, or more like conceptual or abstract art. Um, so for me, I feel like it's like a transcript of thought in the making.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So,
Well, as you're into psychology, yeah, that should be interesting to a psychologist. Yeah, it's a little bit like if you had a conversation with a friend, and this would be at least part of the conversation, and we'll go into the poem.
yeah, it reminds me of, I forgot which philosopher talks about this, of the idea of like humans as meaning makers.
Yeah,
I,
yeah, and language is the meaning maker as well. So the articulation of feeling and thought through language helps it to emerge, and without the language, it doesn't happen. It may not happen. So you actually, it's kind of interesting because you don't really know when you start, or I don't know when I start what the writing will be like.
yeah. I think yeah, the discussion of language as a meaning maker is really interesting because it's the only medium in which we can communicate to others, but also we are also limited by language by what we can express in different language. You can express different things or things
Yeah.
differently.
For sure, the concept may not even be recognized by a person unless there's a language for it. So, you know, you have to always be enlarging your vocabulary and your knowledge through language. It's definitely something I've always been interested in. As I guess my my bio probably a little bit. I grew up as a son of a diplomat in Eastern Europe, mostly surrounded by other languages that I didn't necessarily understand. I mean, I had to start learning some. I obviously really wanted to, but I also think that that made me more alert to the sound
Yeah,
as much as the meaning, just the music of how people speak.
yeah. That's so interesting. So yeah, in one of your poems, you describe your work as a translation, an attempt to catch, arrest, cross language and space. Can you elaborate on what you mean by translation in this context?
Yeah, I think that to go back to the original meaning of translation, it is to carry something from one shore to another and to safely transport what is precious cargo. And I basically think of a poem by W.S. Merwin called "The Wine," which maybe you know that poet. Merwin begins the poem with "What joy I am carrying a case of wine up a mountain." But soon he adds, "It is wine that I will not drink." And the poem ends, "How awkward the wine is to carry on my shoulder. That's part of the joy." So Merwin was a translator as well as a poet, and you know, it occurred to me as I was thinking about this that it's all about the wine, and it retains its potential to be expressed in ways that we may not know right now. The wine, the poems, the translations, all of that. And the poet and translator needs to remain, I'd say, open and focused. So open to what this will become and focused on the task, not to drop the case of wine.
Yeah. That brings us to our next question of which poet literary works have influenced your own writing the most, and how have they shaped your approach to poetry?
I've been really lucky to have generous teachers and readers as far back as, well, when I was a kid and in high school as well. My creative writing teacher at that time was really supportive. And I've had great teachers in as a undergraduate and as a graduate as well. So I try to remain as open to influence, like something like I feel it's important to remain like a microphone on the street, but then you have to edit all of that stuff that you're picking up as an open microphone. So I have to learn, I think every poet has to learn how to deal with this influx or these influences. And it can take a while to learn how to edit your poems, to learn how to do lineation, and to be patient and to go through many revisions. And I'd say, also learning from reading. I'm constantly reading, absolutely omnivorous in that way. But poets I'd mention are Alejandra Pizarnik, um, Cesar Vallejo, Frank O'Hara, Nazim Hikmet, just to name a few. And then also other forms of art, which sort of seep into the poems in the book as well, like Jean Cocteau's Orpheus movie. Um, Albert Camus, so The Plague is mentioned in there, paintings by Paul Klee and others, including Joan Mitchell. So there's a lot of sources of influence all the time.
As the winner of the 2022 John Florio Award, you have been involved in numerous translation projects. How does writing poetry compare to translating it? What are some of the differences that stands out to you?
I'd say, translating, you have to be careful not to revise things according to how you would have written them. You have to find the voice that's appropriate, the language that's appropriate for the writer that you're translating. So trying to find an equivalent for the sound and the style that is proper to the original, and it may not be from the same era, from the same culture as the translator. So it strikes me that whereas poets are notoriously egoists, translators are on the other side. Absolutely, you have to be selfless there. But then, paradoxically, as a translator, you have this temerity to speak for someone else and to to translate their words. So the two go hand in hand, I think. It's interesting. It's I've heard translator poets say that the two things for them are not related, that their translations don't influence their writing, but for me, that's not the case. For me, it's like a really intense form of reading. So I'm always learning a lot from the writers I translate on the level of mostly sound and structure. I think there's a kind of music that gets into you as a writer, and then there's the learning of different forms, learning different structures, and having these possibilities open up thanks to the writers that I've translated.
So, what do you hope readers take away from your book? Did you have a specific audience in mind when writing this book?
I'd say, well, interesting question. First of all, definitely write for friends. But overall, I hope readers are intrigued and amused and even reassured. And I'll try to explain that. I think intrigued because not everything is immediately clear, and I know that from people who've read my poems. And amused and reassured because there's some humor in there and some enjoyment. So when life presents us with irresolvable problems and desires we can't fulfill and existential angst, and there is strength in recognizing others are going through the same struggles, throwing us a life raft in their own way, whether it's through their own art across time or somehow right now, mysteriously in the moment. It's sort of the way I feel when I discover a poet who I really love, and I feel reassured that someone else out there understands.
Yeah, your description of growing up in Eastern Europe and like hearing a
Mhm.
lot of languages that you don't understand. I think that was my experience reading your book. It was like,
Oh,
I
hmm
don't understand this, but I there's like a brilliance or a something I know that's magical about it. that even without my understanding, that I know I'm reading something special.
Well, thank you very much for that. That's a really nice compliment. And yeah, I guess, that sort of swimming and things that you don't understand isn't part of the experience I want to put in the poems. So it can be frustrating for readers if they expect to recognize what's going on. Um, but that's not necessarily always my experience that I know what's going on or I recognize what's going on. So there's a kind of overlay of things you know and things you don't know. And I think the poem for me is like a space where I can um, process all of that, phenomena.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for discussing the brilliance behind this publication. I commissioned some wooden luggage will still be out through Agincourt Press. Thank you.
Thank you very much.